Hi, Luke. How are you today?
Awesome. How are you?
Very well. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure to invite you.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Could I ask you to introduce yourself for people who don't know you?
Sure. So, thanks for bearing with me and getting me on the podcast. I'm a fan. So, for your listeners that don't know me, my name's Luke Raven. Follow me on LinkedIn, please. I'm a financial crime fighter now for just shy of 15 years. I've done basically everything. I started in fraud prevention. Done a couple of different types of fraud prevention. Started in cards, did account takeover and internet fraud prevention. Then I moved into sanctions. Then I wasn't much for sanctions, and then I moved into anti-money laundering. And I love anti-money laundering. So fraud and anti-money laundering are both my sort of passions. I've worked for, I said a decade and a half now across giant financial institutions, the biggest kind of banks in Australia, a couple of them, global fintechs, both big and small, listed and tiny startups. I've worked for crypto exchanges. I've worked for businesses that have gone under due to fraud. So I've kind of been everywhere and seen everything. And I'm a bit of not everything yet, and not everywhere. You're always learning, but I'm a bit of a LinkedIn influencer, for better or for worse. So I like to make a lot of content on LinkedIn around anti-money laundering, scams, fraud, the odd sanctions piece, and spread sort of the knowledge that I've gained over this time within the rest of the community. So that's me.
Amazing. We're going to touch several things that you from your introduction, but I'm usually start my podcast with the simple questions. Fraud prevention. What is fraud prevention for you?
It's a great question. So I'm very regulatory focused compared to some of your guests that I've seen. So I think fraud prevention is a patchwork between various things. So you've got your regulatory approach, you've got private institutions, what the processes that they go through, and you've got an individual level, what we all should be doing to look out for ourselves and one another. So fraud prevention is, I think the best way to think of it is it's a collaborative effort between government and law enforcement, banks and financial institutions, e-commerce platforms, and end users. And obviously, we all want to fight the bad guys. That's essentially it.
Since you mentioned you really like IML, and we're going to touch about IML a bit later, but why you actually decide to switch from fraud fighting to I mean it's still part of this, but why fraud prevention is less interesting for you rather than ML?
No,
What
I'm
is
on
so
both.
passionate about ML?
Yeah. Look, I think that they're two sides of the same coin. So I really think you can't have good money laundering without a bit of fraud mixed in there. And of course, when you commit fraud, and this is something that my colleagues in the AML profession are just becoming aware of now, but it's been the case for a long time. When you commit fraud, you need to launder the proceeds of that. So I view them as very connected. If someone's trying to commit fraud, say you're a bank, if someone's trying to commit fraud by signing up as someone that they're not, there's two reasons for that. One is they're going to commit fraud against you. They're going to defraud you, get loans, get credit cards. It's actually Ivan, but he's opening an account in Luke's name, and the bank's going to be left with the bill because Luke's going to refuse to pay. So that's one thing. Or they're going to receive funds and be used for money laundering. So because no one really wants to be pegged to their own name when they're laundering funds and receiving funds that are illicit in their origin and nature. So I tend to think that they're very linked, and that we need to understand that linkage more and talk about it more, and that we need to collaborate more, really, because one thing I've noticed across my career is when you go to a fraud conference, there's so many people there from platforms, and you don't have to be captured by regulation to be doing your best to fight fraud. And the reason for that is simple: is if you have a lot of fraud on your platform, you're going to lose money. Whereas it's not the same with AML. And so I like tying them together and saying, well, if you've got fraud obligations, if you've got fraud responsibilities, you need to be concerned about the AML side of things as well, because you can't have one without the other. No one would commit fraud if you couldn't get away with the money. Any crime that's acquisitive, where you get some money, you need to do something with that money, walk the funds, make them appear clean and use them. Otherwise, there's no point in committing the fraud in the first place. So I tend to think that they're intrinsically linked, that this linkage is very misunderstood and not talked about enough. And then you also have people, unfortunately, creating buzzwords like Framel. Sorry, I shouldn't swear on your podcast. I hate that word though. It's a terrible word. Because they do need to be considered as separate disciplines that are related and cooperate, not one discipline all merged together. Mixing them together is kind of like saying, well, we should just have policemen that are also firefighters. It doesn't work. But that's why I'm really passionate about it. I think there needs to be more discourse, and the discourse needs to be more intelligent than just saying, oh, everyone should do everything.
Yeah, I really like that you mentioned that, and then go from Froster's perspective at getting something from this manipulation. Otherwise, it's not make sense. And some people who just like try to create some conspiracy theory to say, oh, they just try to achieve some stuff at the end of they probably focus to get something from these like actions. If you not
It's a
see
job.
they getting something, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
probably
I
need to
love my job,
look
but I
more
wouldn't do it
deeper.
for free. So, frauds is the same.
Yeah. I believe I have really interesting questions before we're moving to IML. What's your opinion about crypto?
Oh, crypto is great. Look, I'm kind of rare when it comes to crypto because I am moderate. I don't think that it should be banned. I don't think that it's like the thing fueling the illicit economy. But I also don't think that it's going to be the future of finance and transform everything. I think it's just going to be another product at the end of the day. And the reason that a lot of blockchain advocates are really keen about it because of the technology. I understand that. Centralized databases do a great job of things as well. I'm more interested about what it says culturally and socially about us, is that the way traditional finance has gone has gathered a lot of pushback from people that don't love how things have been happening. I think that that's worth paying attention to. In terms of crime, again, it's nowhere near as crime proof as the blockchain analytics firms and the crypto bros will have you believe. It's that they're incorrect, but it's does have benefits for fighting financial crime, the same as banks do. So again, I'm not for banning it. There's certain people out there that'll say that it's nothing but used for terrorism and laundering funds. I think they're wrong. It is used for speculation by people that don't like the traditional financial system, and that's their right. But it is used by bad guys, so we need to have strong regulations. Things like the travel rule, which is it's funny because a lot of pushback against that kind of stuff is like, oh, and they're clamping down on it. They're really just bringing it in line with what is already the case for traditional financial institutions. So, yeah, that's a good question, though. That's a hairy one.
But I'm looking from the crypto perspective that if we don't have this this product at all, the progress that we had for the last 5 years in the banking industry never happens because it's no competitors to them, and nowadays they really try to. It's a lot of new payment approaches in the market, and banks really try to innovate the system. They speed up some payouts, they speed up a lot of the services, give more visibility to the customers. And without these products, we are not able to push this big giant corporation to move something like more close to the customers at the end.
I mean, I would agree with you, but I would challenge whether it's crypto or whether it's fintech, because fintech's been doing that for longer than the crypto industry, I think. And I agree with you though. The best influence that fintech has had, it hasn't come in and replaced traditional finance. And there's differences because crypto wants to replace, whereas fintech is like, oh, we can just do it a little bit better. But it's the same influence. You have these challenges, and they're creating customer-centric experiences, better onboarding flows, better risk management in some cases, worse in others. And they are for moving the status quo and bringing the incumbents along on that journey. I definitely agree. There's a case for innovation being an impetus for more innovation in the traditional industry. Yeah, it's a good thing to have.
Yeah, can't agree more. Yeah. So the next question is going to be about these three letters that we mentioned already a lot. This AML. For people who are not familiar, it is anti-money laundering.
Yeah.
I believe everyone knows these phrases for sure. But I'm quite curious how AML regulation has been changed so far and where it's going.
Yes. Do you want me to answer from an Australian perspective or globally?
I would say I quite just think about an Australian market in general because it's
Yep.
don't get me wrong, I don't know much people
Yeah,
who like
you may not have many
really try
Australian
to
listeners.
skill up about Australian like how it's operates there. It's a lot of people who just like provide information about states and Europe, but like Australia is quite like quiet compared to these big, giant markets, I would say.
Sure, no, fair enough. So I'll speak just generally. Look, the AML regime's older than I am. It's largely driven by things that people don't really want to hear about day to day. So when I talk about AML, I want to get people involved. I talk about human trafficking and child exploitation, drug trafficking, serious narcotics, and organized crime. But if you really want to look at it, there's some terrorism mix in there, which obviously everyone is interested in, but it's a very small part of the picture. It's largely tax evasion. if you look at historically why governments care about this, it's largely been tax evasion, because tax evasion is a predicate offense. If you avoid taxes, evade taxes, a lot of the time you need to launder the proceeds of that crime that you've committed. It's largely driven by kind of international pressure by giant organizations, and I don't want to come across too critical of them. I think they do a decent job for what they are, which is large bureaucratic organizations operating across borders with no real power. They can't do much. They can name and shame you, but that's about it. So in terms of changes that are coming through, one really positive thing across the world, we've had this regime for 30, 40 years, maybe more. And what we've got is not a lot of effectiveness. We don't have a lot of outcomes. So when we're talking about money laundering, we're talking about the proceeds of crime. And one of the real keys of success, what success looks like, is not just stopping crime, but seizing those proceeds and arresting people, right? So criminal asset forfeiture and seizures. We don't have a lot of that. And so there's a bit of a impetus in the industry for change and for actual effectiveness as opposed to compliance. And you'll see this if you go and look at any job boards, or even just the job titles of people in organizations. A lot of the time, and I kind of got at this before, a lot of the time, it's known as compliance, right? You do it because you have to do it. And so the law says we have to do X, Y, Z, and we go, okay, how can we implement X, Y, Z as cheaply as possible with as little customer friction as possible? Whereas with fraud, because you have losses, people will do it even if they don't have to under the law. And I think that this is now starting to change. We're starting to look at things and say, well, there's compliance. You need to meet your regulatory obligations. You need to do X, Y, Z because the law says so. But we're actually trying to achieve an outcome. We want to actually have an impact against financial crime, because it does encompass all those horrible crimes that I mentioned: child exploitation, human trafficking, drugs, organized crime, embezzlement, bribery and corruption. All of these beget money laundering. And so people are waking up to it. The fact that it's very important to get done correctly and to be done effectively rather than in a box checking kind of way. And I think that regulation generally around the world is moving in this direction, which is a real positive thing. It's slow, but we are making progress. So I'm generally optimistic about it.
And if we're speaking about like Australian market, is it like aligned with the global markets, or it's maybe a bit quicker?
We're way behind. The Financial Action Task Force, FATF, mutual evaluation of Australia, will be coming up in 2025 or 2026, I think. We haven't really made any progress since last time. So there's a whole suite of regulation. I won't bore your listeners with too much detail, but basically, one of the problems with money laundering is if you go to a bank and you show me just whatever you want to show me, you are a launderer in this instance. I can't see the full picture. There's no way knowing that I can know where your funds are coming from or going to. If you just showed me customer deposits and then you have all of your payouts to other people at another bank, I can't see everything because I only have whatever the customer chooses to show me. So it's disintermediated. We can't see the full picture. So for that reason, a really good idea is to regulate accountants, because accountants see the book. They see your entire full book, and they can say, well, you're not paying enough wages because you have 15 staff and you're not doing it correctly, or you have crazy revenue for a cafe in this town. Like, why is your one cafe doing more business than all of my other clients? That could be an illustration that you're washing dirty funds. So that kind of regulatory change is well overdue in Australia for accountants, lawyers. Lawyers are often used. Every organised crime group has a lawyer and has an accountant, and they've got a lot better knowledge of their customers than banks do, because, as I said, banks just have the knowledge that the customers choose to share. And then the last one is real estate agents, because there's no real better vehicle for laundering big money than real estate. It wasn't. I don't think it was invented in Canada, but it's called the Vancouver method. There's famous cases of property being bought with proceeds of crime for laundering money, and it's actually a really good investment in Australia. Historically, it has been. So they make money as opposed to it costing them money to do this. So look, Australia has a bit to do in terms of pulling our socks up to do our part in the international community. I would say I've been pretty. If any of your followers go to my LinkedIn every Monday, I make a post about this, trying to get our Attorney General to pull our socks up.
Yeah, I like your post. It's like very informative, and I learned so much about like Australian markets. I can imagine like a couple of years ago that I'm gonna be reading a lot of the stuff about it, but yeah, I found this one very interesting.
I'm glad you like.
I began my career in bank back in Russia like 12 years ago. And of course, because I work in bank, it's I'm supposed to be learning something about anti-money laundering. And one of my first mentor told me that the hardest part to working in money laundering, that as long as the payment multiple cross borders, it's like nightmare to return money back. So if it's like going to one country, it's a small possibilities you can return it. But if it's crossed like several countries, like somewhere around the world, it's like no options to get money back, even if it's some big organization like I know FBI going to be looking after this. Mm-hmm. Is it true, or it's just like misleading information from my first mentor?
No, I think your first mentor was right on. You can even find that within the country. It doesn't necessarily need to leave the country, but the more barriers you put up to cooperation, and tracing those funds, the better it is for the bad guys, and the worse it is for the good guys. So generally, what you've referred to there is called walking the funds, and it's like you want to get as far removed as quickly as possible. You're not really worried so much with obfuscation and making it look super legitimate. You're just trying to get work, because it's very easy to move funds rapidly across borders and everything these days. And every time you do that, you bring in a new level of international cooperation that's needed to reverse those funds, whether it's through the financial institutions or through a law enforcement agency. If you're needing to subpoena multiple banks along the way, if you're needing to seize assets in another country, it's not impossible. It's just more difficult, and it takes time. And all the time that you're catching up, the fraudsters or the bad guys can be walking those funds further and further and further. So this is, your mentor was right. That is a big challenge that we have.
Yeah, and I don't see. Unfortunately, I may be like a bit of pessimist here, but my expectation is not going to be resolved near future, because everyone tried to actually stop the working together. So everyone tried to against and reject all these collaboration requests from like government perspective, not from their companies or bank perspective. But it's nowadays the case.
And with AML, a lot of the time, it's this trade-off, right? So if I wanted to send you money to thank you for having me on your wonderful podcast, I wouldn't be thrilled if it took 2 weeks to get to you. I would actually be extremely annoyed about that. And yet that's kind of what we would have to do if we wanted all of those payments to be able to be recalled very easily. So, it's a balancing act, unfortunately. People like to point out that money laundering and illicit finance is a massive industry. I think people claim it's the third largest in the world. There was a recent report that said there's $3 trillion of it. And it's a lot, but it still pales in comparison to the rest of the economy, right? So you don't want to grind the economy to a halt in order just to prevent one problem. If you go too far with the friction, unfortunately, you'll actually cause more damage. We might eliminate, you'll never eliminate, but you might severely curtail laundering. But you, along with it, so too you'll curtail e-commerce and trade and all sorts of good things that you want to encourage.
And if you're going to your like main journey, like why you decided in the first place join this fraud fighting career? What was your motivation? What's the story behind?
I'm very lucky. My entire career, I've been incredibly lucky. So I can't claim that there was any grand plan or any planning on my part. I'm just, yeah, I'm incredibly lucky. I took the first job that I ever took in this area. I took it because I could do it part time at uni and earn a lot of money. Because it was horrible shifts, so I got paid penalty rates. I didn't really care what I was doing. I was coming from a debt collection background before that, and that was a job that I truly despised. And so I had customer service experience on the phone. I could take a lot of abuse, which is what happens when you block someone's card as well. So I just lucked into it, and then I found a career that I found really rewarding because I was helping to keep customers safe and catch bad guys. It's very fun as well. Like for my kind of brain, it's pattern recognition. And fraud especially, I wonder sometimes, Ivan, if I would have really got into it if I'd gone straight to AML. Because one of the frustrating parts about AML is you don't necessarily get a yes or no answer. You say something is suspicious and it disappears and you might never see it again and you don't know whether or not it was a bad guy or not. Whereas with fraud, it's more binary. You find out a lot of the time. Yes, that was fraud. I saved my customer. Oh, awesome. And so it's pattern recognition with a payoff. And so it was like a drug for young Luke. Yeah, I think I was just incredibly lucky. There's nothing else for it. I would encourage people to check out fraud and anti-financial crime careers because I've personally find it incredibly fulfilling. I can't picture doing anything else.
So you're one of these people who just really feels the way how the fraud fighting works. So you find some patterns, you just create some rules or close some accounts, and you feel so good inside yourself to say, yeah, I stopped something. And when you're doing IML stuff, you're just like, okay, it looks suspicious, so we need to request documents. So documents seems like fake or it's like something not leading. I just cancel this transfer. Yeah, it's another woohoo for today.
Well, look, that's the pessimist view, I suppose. There's more of that in AML for sure. There is. There's still those great cases, though. Don't get me wrong. I tend to think that the doldrums, the boring parts of AML are worse because they're more frequent and more common. However, I tend to think the big cases that you get are every bit as interesting or even more because you don't just find a fraud ring installing skimming devices on an ATM or someone defrauding you through account takeover or applying for a false loan or whatever. You find really big bad guys like organized crime groups, some significant sort of findings. However, they're fewer and further between. There's no doubt about it. So you've got to have a bit of patience in your AML career, I think. And there's nothing. I will say though, in my whole career, I love the immediacy of fraud. Like I'll block a card in my early career. I'll block a card and I'll find out. I'll speak to that customer, and that's really satisfying. But there's probably nothing better than you submit a report and a year and a half later you find a media article about that person being prosecuted for serious financial crime, and you go, oh wow, I was a part of that. A silent part. I'll never get thanked specifically, but I was a part of that. That's a huge payoff too. But it's a much longer time between your between your sort of pats on the back that you get.
It actually was one of my questions, follow-up questions, because for me, everything that's related compliance, sometimes it takes ages to resolve something. And it's time to time, a lot of let's call it paperwork. You need to fill a lot of documents, just forms. And in my mind, in most of the time, people not getting some outcome of their work. However, what you mentioned, after maybe certain of time, you're getting information to say, yeah, so here's article, and you just I definitely know what it's about because I was part of this investigation like maybe half a year ago or a year ago. I know how long it might take. Sometimes it might take ages, but
It does.
in general, it's like just like longer perspective.
That's right. That's right. And that's why I think it's important for your compliance people to really be talking about why, because it is longer. It's hard. It's harder to get people to buy into it. It's important that we really look at the paperwork, as you said, as you called it, and make sure that it's appropriate and actually useful, and we're educating people about why we're asking for these things. Otherwise, it kind of you get a lot of pushback.
Have you been victim of fraud?
It's a good question. I don't think so, no. But it depends. It depends how you classify it. So in Australia, we've had a lot of data breaches, and unfortunately, some of the merchants with data breaches have had my details in them. So that means that my driver's license has needed to be reissued twice because it was known to have been compromised, not through any fault of mine, but through a big giant merchant. Then the other thing is, of course, smaller merchants that don't store your card details correctly or a cyber compromise. So I don't think I've been a victim of fraud. I've certainly been impacted by it because I've had credit card fraud a couple of times, but you get the money back. I've had some really positive experiences with my banks in Australia. I think we've pretty much solved credit card fraud. Like you don't often hear of someone getting defrauded via their credit card and not getting the money back. And if you get the money back, have you really been a victim? I say no. And so for that reason, I think I haven't been a victim. I've definitely experienced it though. And it's funny though, because with my focus, I always find it quite exciting because I get to look at the experience end to end and say, was this a good experience or not? How could they have done better? And it used to be that when it would happen, it's happened like 2 or 3 times over 15 years. It used to be that it would be like not a great process, lots of paper forms, maybe go to a police station, something silly like that. Whereas the last time it happened to me, which was a couple of years ago, it was done in app. They alerted me. Someone called me straight away and said, "We'll get you a new card out. You can verify that I am from the bank by looking in your app," and it was amazing. So yeah, I don't think I've really been a victim of fraud, but everybody is touched by it these days, especially with scam messages and everything like that.
Quick one. I read one article a couple of weeks ago. I don't want to name the country, but so one of the country thinking about to give people opportunity to block on some like government portal. That's where you see your taxes. You kind of set up a block to getting any credits for your profile. So every time when a bank entering your tax ID, they supposed to be getting notification that you're probably like set up as a flag saying not give me any credits. What do you think about it?
Oh, I don't. Sorry, I haven't read that article, so I don't know enough about that one to really give an opinion. I will say some of the better countries in APAC, at least, around fraud prevention, put it in the hands of users with strong authentication, biometric matching, and a strong government backed identity. So they have, for instance, like essentially identity apps on their phone that are government backed, and they can control whether or not they are approving a new bank account or a new telephone or anything like that through there. And it's not impossible, but it's very, very, very difficult to overcome by a fraudster. That kind of thing, putting the power in the hands of the user, I think is a good thing. Although, yeah, I'd have to look at the specific example to give you a better opinion on it. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was just like it's a question. Just for some reason pop up in my mind. I just
Fair enough.
Yeah. About your career, I saw based at least on your LinkedIn. I don't know how I can trust this one. Maybe you just like made up something. I believe you're not. So high positions like senior manager, directors positions, VP, etc., etc. So what skills are necessary you need to grow to achieve these positions?
Yeah.
In the fraud fighting career.
Yeah, I don't lie on my LinkedIn. So my career is my career. And when I was young, the advice that I wish I'd got, it took me a long time to get into sort of mid senior positions that I have. A lot of people have climbed the corporate ladder faster than I have. So I don't know if I'm the best, but I certainly wish I had got this advice when I was younger. I used to think that the way you get a promotion or the next job is by being good at your current job. And not just being good at it, but also doing it really diligently and doing it a lot. So doing more work than anybody else, doing it a really high quality, caring a lot more than anybody else about the work that you're doing. So young Luke was pretty cutthroat to deal with in terms of if you were working with me, I would be like, okay, it's me versus you today. Who's going to do more work? And the funny thing and the frustrating thing for young Luke was that didn't make me any friends, and it certainly didn't get me ahead in my career because it's not actually how you get ahead. So if you want to progress your career, you need to be doing things more intelligently than that. I think the best things you can do are ask why, because if you're just hammering away at the work, you're never going to actually understand the principles behind it. And it took me far too long to realize the most important question isn't how much. How much have you done? It's can you articulate why? Why are we doing it? And that way you can actually come up with better ways of doing it, more efficient ways of doing it, more effective ways, or more coverage, right? Then the other thing is communication. I think that being able to communicate the complex simply is one of the key things that differentiates between someone who's doesn't understand it very well and is junior and someone who's more experienced. I think it was Einstein that said the best way to tell an expert is someone that can explain a complex. He said it a lot more eloquently than I'm doing right now, but essentially to be able to explain things to a child, then you can you really understand it. That's what you should be aiming for in everything. So if you join a team and you think, oh, I'm going to learn the processes and do the processes really well, that'll just make you an expert at doing the processes, not addressing the risks, not necessarily understanding what's happening behind the processes. And that's the key difference, I think, between being ready for promotion and not ready for promotion. So, yeah, that's as soon as I started asking why are we doing this, and thinking about the implications of that, that's when I started to get career advancement.
So how do people say, look in the bigger picture? I don't like this phrase, to be honest. It's like, look in the bigger picture. It's like, of what? I just like, but I like your approach. Like, why? Like,
Mm,
why we handle these cases manually? Maybe we start to automate them, or why we need to request all these documents. We understand the requirements. It's another way, but maybe we can do some changes in our process and just like do it in more smart way rather than practical.
absolutely, yeah. You need to have a design mindset, and it's not like you're speaking to one of the great innovators of the century or anything like that, but you need to be open to challenging things and doing things differently. But that only comes. Uh, Actually, I would say one of the big criticisms I have of a lot of the fintech firms and crypto firms, the new entrants, is they have this mindset, which is awesome, but they don't actually have the understanding of why they're doing it in the first place. And so that's when it becomes dangerous. That's when that's less akin to saying, let's have driverless cars. And it's more akin to saying, well, let's just remove seatbelts. It's not the same thing.
I quite just think, do you have any specific questions during the interview when you hire someone to your team
Yes.
that you usually ask? Like
Absolutely.
kind of like Luke question.
Yes. I'll give you the secret sauce to a Luke interview. If I'm assessing someone for an interview, I want to know that they understand why or that they can think why. So I ask them how they would actually do things from a bad actor point of view. So if I'm interviewing you for a fraud role, I want to know how you'd defraud me, how you'd commit fraud and use my organization, how you'd use our products. If I'm interviewing you for an AML role, I want to know how you'd launder money through the products that we offer. That's it. If someone can answer that and has thought about that, that's awesome. And it put people on the spot. I'm happy with people taking a minute and thinking about it. But if they don't know how to answer that, then they don't understand the risk that they're actually addressing. So that's my definite. I think every compliance and risk person should ask that in the interviews and really assess whether did that person understand the underlying risk of why we do what we do.
Sorry, and you're asking this one in a way, just like, I give you my credit card numbers. You have 30 seconds to answer how you spend it. Yeah.
No. More like so I've worked at international remittance firms. I've even worked at a crypto firm for a little bit. I worked at a couple of places where we issued cards or issued accounts. Other places where we issued you the ability to take a card payment. So the products are all different, right? And they all lend themselves to crime, absolutely, but in different ways. So if you were to say that if you were to say something around using cash, that could be really relevant for a bank with branches or ATMs. It wouldn't really be relevant for a fintech, right? So they have to consider the differences of approach. That's all.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So if you're tired of what you're doing on day-to-day, like work with ML, what's your plan? You continue your LinkedIn career, I believe,
Correct.
and one day expecting from them.
Yeah, look, I'm lucky. I don't know if I'm just not very intelligent or what, but I don't get bored of my day to day. I love my job. If I don't love my job, I don't stick around. That's true. But I put a lot of effort. I'm very passionate about the underlying reasons for why we do what we do. So I put a lot of effort in my free time into producing content to educate victims, to try and give tips and pointers to other people in the industry, to advocate for regulation that I think is sensible and necessary, and regulatory change to address issues where I see them. So that's kind of how if I have a frustrating day, that's what I do. I try and channel my personal efforts into progressing the actual industry, I suppose. Yeah.
Or like block a couple more customers, yeah, to feel good.
Yeah, I just take a couple more customers, sure.
Do you have any nightmare case that you can shake from your memory?
Yes, I do. It sounds like a good case right till the end, okay? So I told you already, one of the frustrating things about AML is that crossover between AML and fraud is not well understood. And also you often don't know the full picture. But this is a great story of a time when we definitely got the full picture. So there was a guy, he was a convicted fraudster. So we already knew he was pretty high risk. It could end there. The story could end there as we declined the account. And we did decline the account, of course, but it didn't end there. we actually did our job properly, and we went on to understand what he was doing. So he'd been convicted, he'd got out of prison, he'd served his time, but we obviously considered that a risk flag. So we wanted to understand exactly what his business was doing. So we asked him for this concept of source of wealth and source of funds, which is something that you get from AML, because obviously you want to understand where they're getting their money from and try and understand whether that's a licit or illicit source. And what we found was he was making lots of deposits that are called structured, which means they're just below the amount where there's mandatory reporting to the authorities. And a lot of bad guys do this. It's not a very sophisticated money laundering method, but they do it. So he was making a lot of deposits at another financial institution. He actually gave us all this information. He just shared his bank statements. And what he was doing was he was sending it via crypto out. And I thought, this is very strange. This is very odd. And he at the time, he wanted to be onboarded to an international remitter. So obviously he wanted to replace the crypto leg with remittance, international remittance. So he was getting money in Australia big time. He was structuring it and he was sending it out of the country, and he wanted a new way to do that. So I looked at what his actual website was doing. It was very difficult to find. He wouldn't share it with us, but I managed to find it anyway. And he was selling fake COVID vaccines. Yeah. So he was selling fake COVID vaccines at a time when the pandemic was absolutely having a huge impact on everybody. Everybody was terrified. In Melbourne, Australia, we were all locked in our houses. With one of the most drastic lockdowns in the world. It was something that was really, really daunting, and a lot of people were scared and wanted the vaccine, but it hadn't been developed yet. Okay. This guy was selling fake ones. He was buying them, he was selling them. And I think that's what he was doing with the cryptocurrency, was actually buying the fake vaccines. There was a couple of big busts in the news about this Chinese factories producing fake vaccines and selling them and exporting them. I think he was buying from them. So I found the website, right? I knew he was laundering money. He was a convicted fraudster. He was structuring deposits into his account. He was selling people fake vaccines. So I declined the account. I did my duty. I submitted an SMR, which is a suspicious matter report to our authorities, and nothing. So this case haunts me because it's probably one of the better ones where I've seen the full picture. I've actually managed to put the full picture together. And often you sort of sit around and you remember the name. I'm not allowed to share the name for legal reasons, but you remember the name, and every now and then you Google him. You say, has he gone to prison yet? Has someone picked up my thing? Because I laid it all out perfectly. I sent it off my report, and nothing happened. He's still walking around as far as I can tell. So this is pretty bad. This is an indictment of, we've done a really great job. We've done a really great job, and we've found a really bad guy doing really nasty stuff, and nothing happened. So this kind of haunts me because, unfortunately, with AML, we can do the best job in the world, but if the public resourcing isn't there to actually pick that report up and do something about it, if the training isn't there, or if there's just no capacity, nothing will happen. And that's kind of disappointing, especially when you've managed to put together such a pretty torrid kind of story about this guy who's already been to prison in the past. It'd be really easy for someone to go out there and pick him up and really charge him for. And this was a large amount of money too. We're talking, not an insignificant amount of people scammed, and money laundering offenses, fraud again. But yeah, no splash, unfortunately. So that's one that haunts me for sure.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I'm like kind of like waiting, like how's it genuinely?
Yeah, a bad one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but no, from the COVID perspective, I'm expecting some documentary Netflix in 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, when they start to like looking back and they explain what's actually COVID, how it was handled around the world, what was like the vaccine, or like, I don't know, because right now a lot of news that's like the vaccine is not a vaccine, it's like something else. So my expectation is 5-10 years from now, it's going to be Netflix documentary to say COVID and how it was, and why we did everything wrongly. And I hope your part of the story gonna be handled by Netflix. It's gonna be amazing.
Well, they know how to contact me, and I know for one thing is if anyone bought the vaccine off this guy before it was developed, it certainly wasn't the vaccine. It was something else that I wouldn't recommend. Yes.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
Mm.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't have any other questions. However, I usually left some time at the end because I know you're working on a lot of the projects. And if you want to share with someone projects you're working on or some things you're doing on day to day, it's a great time to share this one.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely. So look, I'm not on behalf of any employer or anything today, but I'm part of a group called the Global Coalition to Fight Financial Crime. And stories like that last one, that's what we're trying to solve for. So it's a fantastic group. I'm not senior in the group. I'm the communications director for APAC. But I would really hope that your viewers and your listeners could get some value out of following us on LinkedIn and going to our website. We run working groups. We try and tackle serious issues. So right now in APAC, we're looking at fraud and scams across Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, and other nations. And we have chapters in Africa, we have chapters in Europe. So it's a really awesome way to get out some of that, that frustration where you say, geez, I wish I could be more effective. That's what we're trying for. So yeah, I would really hope that your viewers could check us out and see if they can get involved in one of the local chapters if and when something comes up that appeals to them. That's probably the biggest thing that I'm working on at the moment that I'm very excited about.
sounds really amazing. And for everyone who listen or watch right now, it's going to be in description, the link to this group. Please take your time to have a look. I believe everyone who participates in this podcast try to do work a bit better and try to prevent all these like weird things that we're discussing. Not in the first episode is about like human trafficking, etc., etc. So yeah, please check it out. I believe it's valuable for everyone, not only for someone just who created this group.
That's right.
Yeah. Luke, thank you so much for joining me today. It is a pleasure, and I'm so excited because right now you're actually the first one which I'm recording with that much time different
Oh,
because you're right now in Australia, I'm here in London, so it's quite interesting.
you've conquered
For me, it's great
the
experience.
time-space continuum. Well done.
Yeah, thank you so much once again to join me. I learned a lot about AML. I'll be honest with you. In the first place, I thought, okay, AML, it's like kind of boring stuff. But how you describe it, it's quite interesting and give me a bit of more sense of what it is and what it is about.
Oh, good. Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
So I'm going to say my favorite word on which I'm saying each episode, which is cut.